Hey, everybody, welcome. We're just going to give a couple minutes for people to jump on. In that interim, could someone who is already on go ahead and ask a question in the question and answer? We're going to post some links, and the only way we can respond is if someone asks a question, which seems very limited, but here we are. Perfect question, Ashley. There will be a recording posted, right, Laura? Yes, there's going to be.
Yes, there will be. We will send this recording out probably
One day,
tomorrow.
one day in the future, sometime after it happens, we will send a recording. Okay, so while Laura is responding to that, I want to give you all a little bit of just information. So this class is a little bit different than the past two webinars we've done, because for this class, we have some CEUs available from a grant, so continuing education units, if you need any for anything, from an OSHA training institute here in Alabama. So if you are willing and able, there are some links that we're going to post. Are you able to get those in that box if I describe what they are, Laura, or are they labeled
I
as?
did. I put them under Ashley's question.
Okay,
And then
perfect.
if you're watching this at a later
Oh,
date, we will have those sent to
that
you
is
as well.
wonderful. So the way this is going to work is there's going to be, it's a pre-test and then there's attendance. It's a quick, I want to say 10 question quiz. And then those 10 questions is actually great if you just miss them all. So feel free to go through and answer those questions because you're going to get a post test at the end of the training to evaluate if you, I mean, it's a very loose way of saying if you learned anything. Most of you who are interested probably know some stuff about heat stress. And then there's evaluation also. And so if you complete all of those, you'll get some CEUs from the University of Alabama, our OSHA Training Institute, and from that grant from OSHA. So you'd be really helping OSHA out. If you are able to complete those links, you'd be helping me out and you'd be helping the University of Alabama out, which I have mixed feelings on since I went to Auburn or Eagle. Sorry, Laura. Okay. With all of that, I think it's a good time to start. So this is going to be a heat stress monitoring training and heat stress prevention training. It's a really hot button issue. Now, this training was actually like developed and approved by OSHA before the announcement of their proposed standard. So we won't really be covering the specifics of that standard, but I do have some familiarity. So if you have some questions, feel free to drop them in that question and answer, and I should be able to see them. And if not, Laura will get my attention and we'll answer those questions. So please make it as interactive as you would like. But so I'm Stephanie Lynch. This is that pre-test. If you didn't want to use the links, you can use this QR code with your phone or tablet. My name is Stephanie Lynch. I work as the Senior Technology and Research Manager for OHD out of Birmingham, Alabama. We manufacture and sell industrial hygiene instrumentation to include heat stress monitoring equipment, so WBGTs, as well as the slate safety personal monitors, which we'll discuss the different types of technology. So that's just sort of in the interest of full disclosure. This is that attendance QR code. Again, these links are in the question and answer section in case you're just joining us. And if you're able to complete these links, you can get CEUs. This is just a little bit of that legalese. So I do not speak on behalf or for OSHA, but this training was developed and approved by OSHA under a grant, Susan Harwood grant, I believe. So these are some of the things that we're going to cover. So what is heat stress? What is heat illness? OSHA guidelines, who can be affected? How do we identify symptoms? And if we do identify symptoms, what are we going to do about it? And then how do we help prevent it, to include different means of monitoring? So our, sort of tools in the toolbox. So heat illness is when your body can't, or heat illness happens, or heat stress starts when your body can't cool itself appropriately. So when it gets overwhelmed by either radiant heat from the sun, high humidity, when your sweat's not able to evaporatively cool you. When any of those things start to compound, your body temperature is going to go up. And as it rises, if you're still not able to cool yourself, the consequences can get more and more severe. And that goes all the way up to heat stroke, of course, which is a life-threatening emergency. So currently, we all know about this proposed rule from OSHA that's going to totally change this landscape. But currently, heat stress is still covered by the general duty clause. You have a responsibility as an employer to provide your employees with a place of employment that is free from known hazards, and heat is a known hazard. We know that that causes illness in people, so it can be covered by the general duty clause. And this is getting used more often because even though that proposed standard is not in place, OSHA does still have that national emphasis program that started in, I want to say April of 2022. So we've seen an increase in interest and ways to help prevent heat illness, and the OSHA Training Institute has clearly seen an increase in people wanting training. So I'm sure that'll continue to rise with this standard being introduced. I think they'll see some challenges at first, but I do think that ultimately they will end up with a standard. So these are some of those operations that might cause heat stress. So any operations that have high air temperatures. One that was sort of unique to me more recently was an industrial dry cleaning operation in Georgia. I had not seen one of those before, and this particular one, I'm not sure how normal that is, but it had no air conditioning in the facility. It was quite hot, and it was in southern Georgia, and it also seemed to have a high population of workers who were what I would call vulnerable workers. So just really interesting experience, and yeah, so anything involving high air temperatures, anything with radiant heat sources, and hopefully we know what our largest radiant heat source is, right? The sun. So any of our outdoor workers, but also things like furnaces. I used to work at a steel mill, lots of radiant heat sources in the mill. High humidity. We're down here. Well, I'm currently in Arkansas, which is actually feels a little less humid. I think it is, but Alabama, very humid. Any direct contact with any hot objects, and of course, how strenuous your work is. There's a big difference between sitting in an office that maybe gets a little too warm and being outside and conducting some manual labor. So a lot of differences in how that's going to impact us as people. So who does that affect? That's all of those workers who are exposed to those conditions, particularly those who are performing very strenuous work. If they're having to wear personal protective clothing that adds to that burden, adds to that load, that heat load, then that can really impact. And then the biggest thing is if your workers are not acclimated. We see the vast majority of heat illness and injury within the first week of work. And that's because people are not acclimated to either that level or that heat. Sort of one of the big things is there's a really big difference between maybe in Alabama, if you've got a steel mill job, getting someone who's used to the Alabama heat, acclimated to steel mill work, as opposed to taking someone who's maybe from Ohio, bringing them down and them having to acclimate to that kind of work, big difference. So why do we think that it's important to prevent heat illness? There is a lot of evidence to suggest that more accidents happen when people are exposed to heat. As the heat starts to impact you, you can become very dizzy. You can get a little bit confused. I've actually seen where I was unfortunately working at a place where we had a fatality. And at the time, we could not figure out why this guy had just walked into a run where steel pipe was rolling down. And, looking back on it, I wonder how much heat exposure played a role. Like, did he get confused? Whatever. So there's going to be some of that. I think there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that a lot of injuries are actually heat related, but not labeled as such. Because if you just, fall and bump your head, then it's just labeled as a fall. Whereas maybe there was something where heat had to do with it because you become confused, you're tired. Another symptom is employees becoming irritable. If they're always irritable, then that's not it. But if they become irritable and that's not typical, then you might want to look at some heat exposure. Of course, if you're wearing safety glasses or gloves, then the glasses might either fog up or your hands might become sweaty in those gloves, so that heat exposure can lead to increased accidents. Another big thing is just realizing, sort of, I don't want to get too hippy dippy here, but the toll isn't just on this person who's had a heat injury. It's first off very difficult for those people to recover. So that means a person away from work, but that's one man down on your team. How does that affect the other employees? It's going to increase their workload, the cost of training a new employee. It just kind of ripple effects through. And also, just how does it make you feel that one of your employees has gotten so seriously injured, if that's it. So this, I'm not sure how well you can see this graphic, but this is from NIOSH. These are all the risk factors on this graphic for heat stress. But the ones I want to talk about on this slide are those environmental risk factors. So those are the things we just really mentioned, right? The high temperature, the high humidity, how much air is moving, and if that air is actually, cool air moving across you, and then the radiant heat. And those are pretty easy, relatively speaking, to sort of quantify. But something that can be harder are those work-related risk factors. So some of the personal ones, how old are you? How physically fit are you? Are you acclimated to the work that you're doing in the environment that you're doing it? What sort of medical conditions do you have? There are medications that can exacerbate the stress that heat places on your body. If we drink too much alcohol the night before, or if we drink too much caffeine the day of. I constantly see people like drinking monsters to sort of keep going on a work site. And I always wonder how much that's increasing the heat burden on their body. And drug use, of course. So these are things that are much less easy to quantify. And this is one of those reasons that we want to have a really good culture where our employees understand the threat, the risk, and they're going to be able to come to us and express, these things like, hey, I'm on this particular medication, or I have this particular condition. And if you're communicating well enough, they're going to know that they need to let you know, so that there are accommodations that could be made, or whatever. So when we get really, really hot, our heart rate is going to go up. We're going to get more and more blood flow to our skin. And then we're going to start sweating. And that sweat is going to evaporate from the skin. That's going to cool us with convection. And so any of the things that interfere with our body's ability to do that are going to make it harder for our bodies to handle the heat. So we've got sweating, we've got conduction, we've got convection, and we've got radiation. Those are all the ways that the body is going to cool itself. And if any of those, again, get interfered with, then our body's going to have a more difficult time handling the heat. So when we get acclimated to our workload and our work environment, we're going to be more efficient with our sweating. Our heart rate is going to recover better, and our core body temperature is going to be maintained more efficiently. So that's going to reduce the strain on the heart. We're going to get a better, we'll actually just improve our heart rate. It won't get as high, and then it'll also recover more quickly. So those are all the benefits of becoming acclimated to your work and your work environment. One thing that you might see as a means of helping to prevent becoming overcome by heat is to make sure that you're very well hydrated. That goes back to some of the ways that alcohol and caffeine can impact you so poorly. Those are both diuretics. They're going to make you more likely to become dehydrated. So you have to drink a lot more water. But one of the common things you'll see is a urine chart. I'm sure all of you have seen these, but I really prefer the ones that have some sort of helpful hints, right? If your pee is this color, then here's something that you can do, and here's where you need to be concerned. It is important to note that certain medications can impact the color of your pee. And it's not a super fun thing to talk about, but it is true. So these are those heat illnesses. And I want to, sorry guys. I want to point out that this is not a progression. I'm not sure if you can see on a mouse, but it almost looks like this is the way that that heat illnesses progress. That's not true. You can go straight to heat stroke. These are just listed in order of severity. So I have experienced heat rash, and it seems like now every time I get a heat rash, first off, it seems easier for me to get there, and then it seems to take longer for it to go away. And apparently that's pretty standard with these heat illnesses. So if you do become overcome by heat exhaustion, then it's not something that you just snap back the next day and you're feeling better. It can take weeks and sometimes even months to recover, and then of course even more time for heat stroke. One tool that you can use is the heat index. That's going to be a way of controlling your employees' exposure, particularly if they're outdoor workers. But one really important limitation to this heat index is that the values are actually created for shady light wind conditions. So that's not typically the conditions that we see in Alabama, at least. So I don't know about where you are, but if you're exposed to full sun, then you need to note that that can increase those values by up to 15 degrees. And then it's also important to note that if the air is not actually any cooler, so if you have hot, dry air coming across your employees, then that can actually end up exacerbating the heat burden on their bodies. So this is a best practice example where you're setting, a chart to use the heat index, and I mean best practice for utilization of that heat index specifically. There are also some apps that will evaluate the heat index for you. So there's a free one from OSHA that I think we'll have a slide on. There's also a new one that's been released by AIHA, so the American Industrial Hygiene Association. That's a good reference point too. But so this is going to show, when you're in the green and what that means, what's your action plan there. If you're in the yellow, what's your action for there? Get employees to drink plenty of water, 4 cups an hour. You'll see different recommendations, but they're all about the same. Use mechanical means when possible instead of requiring the physical lifting. Go to the shaded area, if possible. Maybe move the work shift if that's an option for you, to move the work shift to the cooler part of the day, whether that's earlier in the morning or later in the evening. I recognize there's a lot of limitation there. And then of course, in the red zone, you change according to your capabilities. So walking through the different types of heat illness, one that you might see is heat cramps. This is a pretty common one. I'm very sorry. I'm not laughing. Heat cramps are not funny, but that picture does not look like someone experiencing heat cramps to me. But heat cramps, I don't know about y'all, but when I get heat cramps, it's actually at night when I've stopped doing all the physical labor, and I'll get one of those cramps in my leg or something. And that's when I experience my heat cramps. But this can happen on the job, and it's when you've been sweating a lot and you've lost all your salt. It's not going to be as easy as just drinking some water to fix the problem, and you're going to get painful cramps. Now, like I said, mine are typically in my legs, but they can happen in your arms or your stomach. And if this starts happening, you want to move a person to a cool area and let them drink some cool water or something with electrolytes, preferably. And if the cramps just don't seem to go away on their own, then you might need to seek some medical care. So these are the signs and symptoms of heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And the biggest difference here is if you're experiencing heat exhaustion, you're going to have very moist, clammy skin, and you might even have a like a lower temperature. But if you're experiencing heat stroke, then the biggest sign of that is that you are going to stop sweating. It's not easy for y'all to chat with me, but I bet if I could chat with all of you, one of you would have experienced something where you stopped sweating. It's a really scary experience, and I've had plenty of people that I know who've experienced it. And you're going to get that very high body temperature, and then it becomes very dangerous very quickly. So heat stroke, again, most severe. With heat exhaustion, that's when again, same thing with sort of heat cramps, but it's when you've had insufficient water, you've lost the salt to your body, and your ability to cool yourself just goes away. You'll start sweating really heavily, and you'll get a very weak pulse. You might have low blood pressure, but you're going to feel very weak. You might be quite disoriented, and you're going to be very, very thirsty. So get medical help immediately if you see anyone experiencing those signs or symptoms. And while you're, waiting for that medical help, you want to make sure you move that person to a cool place. You can elevate their legs if possible. Apply the cold packs wherever you know. So good places on the neck, under the armpits, in the groin, behind the knees. All of those places where that blood flow is closer to the skin, where it's going to be able to cool through that. That's where you want to place some cold packs. If the person is fully conscious, then you can give them some cool water. You actually don't want to make it like too shockingly cold. As far as heat stroke, that this really is the most severe, and this is the body it's exhausted all of its water and salt. So you're going to stop sweating, and at that point, your internal temperature can rise very quickly. This person could be behaving very strangely. They're going to be confused, might be dizzy. They're going to have very hot, red, dry skin. Their pulse is going to increase, and they might have headaches, and then they can pass out. Another important thing to note here, and sorry if we end up having a slide on this, is that even if heat stroke doesn't, kill you at the moment you're experiencing the heat stroke, it can kill you later. So heat stroke can damage a lot of your internal organs that can then later cause a really big problem. So you almost never fully recover with a lot of these heat related illnesses because once you've experienced a heat illness, it's easier to experience it again. You're more inclined. So it's really important to prevent it in the first place. So heat stroke first aid, again, you're going to get that person to a cool place. You want to make sure you remove any heavy clothing. And again, get those ice packs in the spots we discussed where that blood flow is coming close to the surface of the skin, where you're able to cool it, and seek medical attention. Another just note, because I find that some people don't know this, but when we talk about care for seizures, I hope we all know what that means. So there used to be a lot of confusion about maybe putting something in a person's mouth to keep them from biting out on stuff. Please don't get anywhere near someone's mouth who's having a seizure. Just it's more about getting anything out of their way so that they can seize without hitting anything, and it's not going to be they're just not going to hurt themselves. And then don't use aspirin or acetaminophen. Oh, I don't know even how I did that. Well, apparently in this PowerPoint, those links are working. Okay. It's important to remember that really all of these, I'm not sure why that just says heat exhaustion. All of these heat illnesses and heat injuries can be prevented. We want to remember to provide our employees with water, rest, and shade. So easy access to water, putting the space where people can take breaks where it's easily accessible. If you give people 15-minute breaks, but it takes them 10 minutes to walk to their break area, they're not going to use it, and that's not going to be convenient. So don't do that. Make sure that the area is very close, that it has some shade, that it has some air movement, and give people the breaks. I do think it's hilarious that we're talking about breaks and preventing heat exhaustion, and this is very obviously a hot beverage. Don't do that. So provide them cool water, and where possible, limit that time in the heat. One of the ways that you can do this most effectively is by actually looking at your facility and developing a plan that is specific to your facility. That's actually been the difficulty with OSHA introducing a standard beforehand, because heat exhaustion and the risk, or heat stress and the risk, is so site specific, right? It's honestly even quite person specific. So you need to go and develop a plan. The purpose of that plan, this is just some examples of what you might use for the purpose and the scope. So the purpose of that plan is to prevent any heat related illness on your site and help workers have the appropriate training and tools that they need. And tools can be anything from the bottles of water you're providing, or the shade you're providing, or things like heat stress monitors, or WBGTs, widgets to monitor the environment that they're in, to set appropriate limits. So those are going to be specific to each work site, and sometimes as in depth as being specific to the work task involved. But just make sure that you outline your purpose and your scope. You want to train your supervisors, train your workers on whatever prevention, heat stress prevention strategies are appropriate for your work site, as well as how to recognize and report the signs and symptoms of any heat related illness. It is, I mentioned that people can become quite confused. You want to be able to have your employees looking out for each other, because the person that's experiencing it may not be able to recognize it in themselves. You want to monitor the weather and the workplace conditions. That is one way to use the apps that hopefully we see a little bit later. Conduct a heat hazard assessment. This says whenever temperatures exceed 70 degrees Fahrenheit, that's a pretty conservative line, so that's a good one to work off of. And implement whatever strategies are appropriate to your site, and have your plan. You should already have this, but for how you're going to handle your medical emergencies, right? How are one thing that I see happen sometimes is if you have a really large facility, how easy is it for emergency services to access a particular spot? How easy is it for you to communicate that to someone? So, do you need to have a policy where you have someone meet emergency services at the gate to escort them, or do you have a plan outlining how to get to each building that's very easy for emergency services to understand? So this is an image of that app, the heat index app from OSHA. There is a Spanish version for both Android and Apple devices. And this will help provide some warnings. And it even gives you, I have this on my phone too, which I don't see right around me, but it'll also give you, little advice on how to handle it based on what the heat index is at your site. So there is different technology available. There's environmental monitoring technology. So that's your wet bulb globe temperature monitor. That's a special instrument that's going to take it a few steps further than that heat index. So that heat index is quite limited in that it's not going to really show how a person is experiencing that. So this instrument measures heat stress on the body, and it's just going to take some extra things into account. So it's going to have a dry bulb temperature. It's going to have a wet bulb temperature that's including things like humidity and wind into that radiant heat. And then it's going to have a globe temperature that's going to do radiation and wind. So this is another example of widget. In the interest of full disclosure, the ones you see here on this slide are the ones that OHD sells. But so industrial hygienists or safety people, whomever, when I worked at the safety office, this is one of my functions on a military installation, where when it would get warm enough, I think our action level was that 70-degree mark, we would collect WBGT readings at a certain spot on the site that was thought to be one of the hottest spots on our training site, and we would communicate as that progressed into different levels, like y'all saw on the chart, almost like the same chart we saw with the how you might utilize the heat index. It was how we would utilize those widget readings, WBGT. There are other solutions that are available. So you'll see systems now where you can set up a single widget in one site, and it can have satellites that go to monitor other sites, or you can use those satellites to better evaluate how a person is experiencing that. So have one at head height, one at core height, and then one at foot height, depending on how you want to utilize it. And then there are other ones that can go inside an entire facility. So if you have a plant, then you can monitor your high heat zones and get as much or as little information as you want for how that heat is impacting your workers, because the WBGT is better reflecting that. These are some of the devices, both portable and stationary, that you might see at things like a construction site, or for instance, this is the one that we have installed at Auburn for the practice field for the football players. So that's another environment where you really want to, monitor that continuously to make sure you're not putting those student athletes at risk. This is an example of some of the decision-making logic you can use if you are getting those WBGT readings. You can track, what time you took it, what the reading was, what sort of activity level are your employees doing? Is it light work or is it very heavy work? What clothing are they wearing? So is that personal protective equipment adding any burden to that heat stress? And then you're going to let the supervisor know what allowable work minutes your employees can do per hour. And of course, that's very specific to your site. And, I recognize the limitations of that, of utilizing this. So now there's also a ton of physiological personal monitoring. So you can do heart rate monitoring to extrapolate things like core body temperature, or there are now core body core body temperature monitors like that Slate Safety badge that are gonna allow you. So they use a proprietary algorithm to take several things into account to get quite an educated guess at core temperature. So make sure you're just using, whatever tools are available to you, even to include that free app or even just a heat index chart. If you can't follow whatever work rest strategy you're trying to implement from that environmental monitoring, then physiological monitoring may be it's something that's going to ultimately be required, and that's going to allow you to be more personal to your worker. And what you're going to need to document is which sort of physiological monitoring you use. So whether it was just a heart rate monitor or one of those Slate Safety badges, and then what job specific heat stress controls you use, because you are required to implement that hierarchy of controls, which is where you take steps to try to remove that heat exposure before you just implement something to simply monitor it. So you want to try to do whatever you can. Physiological monitoring is going to be just simply a method of evaluating an individual's heat strain. And so once you collect those readings, it's going to you're going to be able to use those to hopefully ensure that none of your employees are going above particular thresholds that are either set by the equipment. So if you're using a heat rate monitor, a heart rate monitor, then you might want to reference, the TLV for how high that heart rate is getting. At least I think they still have a means of doing that with a heart rate monitor. Someone correct me in the question and answer section if I'm wrong about that. But I do know there's a TLV for heat stress. And then if you're using something like the Slate Safety, then you can actually go in there and set certain limits for your workers, so that if it goes over a certain amount, their behavior changes. So personal bio data can be either that heart rate like I talked about or that core temperature. Oh yeah, okay. So personal data is compared to the allowable readings from the ACGIH TLV for heat stress and strain, like I just said. So that's using things like your real-time heart rate, which is going to be the high sustained level is if you get 180 minus your age for more than 4 minutes, continuously. Your recovery heart rate needs to drop down to 120 after 1 minute of rest. And then your indirect core body temperature should not be going above 101.3. But you can adjust those if you wanted, I think, within the Slate Safety. So Slate Safety, again, in the interest of full disclosure, these are actually the OSHA slides, but this is the technology that my company OHD also sells. So one cool thing that you can do if you do have people who are maybe lone workers or you have a very large facility, then you're gonna be able to track where they are. If you have a good relationship with your employees, then hopefully they feel that's a positive thing because you're working to keep them safe. If you don't, then this might not be the best technology for you to utilize at this point, because they might just feel like it's very big brotherish, right? So you want to balance that line of what's best for your facility, but it will sort them based on their risk level with regards to heat stress. So these people, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but you can see over here on the right side, the employees who are in the green. So they haven't crossed any sort of threshold. And then when you get into the yellow, that's showing some moderate risk. And then as you get into the red, we're talking about that's high risk for the development of a heat related injury or illness based on their personal data. So not just on that environmental monitoring data, but on their personal data. Okay, so that was a lot of information to throw out in a short amount of time. and I did want to try to finish pretty quickly because I'm hoping that y'all will take the time to complete the QR codes. So I gave the first two, and they're in the questions and answers on that first question in the question and answer box. But then there's also a post test now. If any of you who are looking for continuing education units are willing to do it, I would greatly appreciate it. And we'll also be sending it out at the end. I did want to point out another, just this is kind of like a random benefit, but I was surprised this wasn't on those slides because I kept bringing up if you have people who are lone workers. But one thing that if even like your Apple Watch can do too, but those Slate safety badges, if you're wearing one of those and you do have lone workers, particularly if they're working outside in high risk areas, high heat, high humidity, think about like utility workers, stuff like that, then that can alert you for things like if they have a medical emergency, like a fall, it can track exactly where they are, which can then help you, send emergency services, kind of cool stuff like that. Again, only appropriate if you have a good relationship and good culture with your people. And then the absolute last thing is the evaluation. I can't thank you enough for attending. I hope you've had a really good Safe+Sound week with OSHA, and I hope you got some valuable information. This is an evaluation for me. So if you didn't like the training, my name is Scott Herndon. If you did like the training, my name is Stephanie Lynch, and please tell Scott I said that if you know him. Does anyone have any questions? Please drop them in the question and answer section. Will even one person tell me if they actually are going to complete all of the lovely OSHA links? Because that would make me incredibly happy. Yay! Thank you so much. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to stay on just to leave this up in case anyone is trying to get through those links. But yes, bye. Thanks so much for attending. Hey, Laura, do you know how I stopped the recording so at least it's not part of it?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Let's see.
I found it. It's again in that more